card, we're in trouble.
Yeah, definitely.
Two red cards and you're out.
So what I'd like to go over is my take, and I've said this to many folks before, but I would like to go over it again if I could. Each of us up here in the council has a slightly different twist, or maybe a greater different twist on exactly what is the situation, and in the end, it all probably adds up to the same thing. But for me, I've always been uncomfortable with structuring the problem as if it was the main root and only root of the cause was the Civic Center. I don't think that's correct. In fact, it isn't correct when you consider that the debt related to the Civic Center is a general obligation of the city, regardless of the source of the payments. It's an obligation of the city, just like any of the services that the city provides. The fact of the matter is we have a structural imbalance between revenues and expenditures. It's just that simple. Right now, the revenues have fallen off. Costs have we've done the best we can, as Councilmember Westman pointed out. We've made a lot of cuts early on in order to try to get it in front of the problem, but the revenues have not returned. There are three basic causes of the structural problem. The first was increased cost to provide city services, and I'll go through that in a minute here. Increased levels of service. There are levels of service that the city has provided that were not originally intended with the last tax increase that occurred back in 2003. And finally, the recession's impact on the city's revenues. A lot of the city's revenues are economy-based. In other words, they fluctuate with the economy, and I don't need to tell you what happened with the economy over the last, since 2008. And a lot of those revenues fell off the edge of the table and went through the floor. The city, as I said, has been cutting costs for the last 3 years, but we can't continue to cut without significantly impacting the services, the basic services that we provide you. And the question that you have is, do you want to continue to cut now that we've cut those services, or do you want to provide some revenue? The property tax increase that you have before you is the revenue proposal. And it's a property tax because, in the council's opinion, a property tax is a stable, equitable, and simple tax. And in the end, what we want to do is try to improve the stability of the city's revenue structure. But in the end, if I can leave you with one thought, that would be that the city must correct the structural imbalance. I think everybody up here is committed to that thought. And essentially the options are increase revenues or cut services, and if the proposed property tax fails, then we will cut services because we are committed to restoring the structural balance of the city. So the cost to provide city services increased over the last 9 years since the last major tax increase, as I said, in 2003. The voters approved a $1.32 property tax levy, and the cost of city services has risen by a lot. You all know what inflation is. A lot of people use this, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, or OFM uses the Personal Consumption Expenditure Report. I think the most appropriate index to use is the state and local implicit price deflator that the state and local government implicit price deflator that is published by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. You can find that. If you look at that, in 2003, the rise between 2003 and now is about 40%, meaning that the inflation rate that's faced local government has been about 40%. And a large chunk of that has come because there's a lot of the costs that go with wages that the city cannot control. Pensions, workman's compensation, unemployment insurance, health insurance to a certain degree. We've switched plans. We've made the city's employees pay a larger portion of their health costs, but it's still rising very, very fast. I think anybody who signs the front of a paycheck knows what I mean by that. I swear that wasn't my heart. The civic center itself was also a cost, an increase of cost. The cost of the Civic Center has also been an increased cost of providing services. But it is, in fact, a cost of providing a service. City Council didn't just wake up one morning and say, hey, gang, let's build a Civic Center. The need to build this Civic Center was recognized decades ago. It appears in the 1995 comp plan as a little square on the plan. It was actually somewhat to the west of here, closer to Old Fort Lake. But it was recognized at the time that a city that was of 600 people, that the facilities that were there to serve that city of 600 people are not going to be adequate to serve a city that is now 8,500 people. And as I say, it's a cost of doing business. Everybody who has employees or works in some place or other knows that you have to provide a place for your employees that's functional for them to work. Most of you, if you work in an office building, you wonder why your employer did that. Well, that's because that's what's expected. And it's the same here. We have to provide place for our employees to work. And the condition of the buildings at the time that we made the finally, after a long process, very public process in which many of you had an opportunity to participate, we chose a course of action to build this Civic Center. I was at the Parks and Recreation fundraising event earlier in May, and I asked our former mayor, Steve Young, back then what he thought about all this ruckus over the costs of the Civic Center and surrounding it. Mayor Young led us through, very ably led us through the process of building the Civic Center, the planning and everything else, and he, in his usual way, turned to me very bluntly and said, John, just remember it was the right thing to do at the time. You remember that, Steve? And you're right, it was. I put this Civic Center firmly in the column of a success. We had to build it. There's no question that we had to build it, and it is providing exactly the services that the city set out for it to provide. It is not a place where we bought a whole bunch of buildings, tore them down, and now we have a hole in the ground in debt that is not being serviced. It's not a convention center that is not producing. It is, in fact, providing every bit of the service we had intended for it to provide. But as I say, it's a cost of doing business. It represents, if you were to try to express the debt service, which is about $1.2 million a year, in property tax terms, it would be about $1. The full debt service here. But because we have other sources of revenue, including REIT taxes, including fire mitigation funds, and other sources, we are able to, the debt service on this would be around 70 cents if you were, 75 cents if you were to try to express it in property tax terms. But it's a cost of doing business, and it's one of the reasons why, but it is not the only reason why we have to raise property taxes. It's not the only reason that we have the structural imbalance. In addition, in the 2003, when the last property tax was put in place, there was an assumed level of services that were being provided at that time that did not include parks, or we did not have the 4 major parks that we have now. In 2007, we took on 4 new parks. We took on Clock Tower Park, which up to that point had been operated and maintained by Quadrant. We took on Powderworks Park, we took on Ross Plaza, and we took on Chief Leschi Park at the top of Hoffman Hill. We also put forward at that time a property tax increase to pay for park maintenance and the greenways, and that failed, 75 cents. So So increased levels of service. We also have been slowly building a more professional workforce. At the time that council came on in about 2003, we were having significant turnover in the fire department. This was just a year after the heroin incident. We had an interim finance director. We weren't passing our audits. We had we had our fourth mayor in a year. We had we were on our 11th council member in a year when we were a five-member council. And there was just a heck of a lot of city turnover, and at the time, we were advised that we needed to develop old growth, and what the individual was referring to was staff who had been on salary for quite some time, or been on the city, been working for the city for quite some time. And the mayor went and stole away from University Place Don Masco. Don, are you here? Yeah, Don Masco, financial wizard, who started putting us back on track for financial. We now pass our audits. We exercise good oversight, and we have a stable workforce. We have outstanding leadership. Both of our chiefs, our fire chief and our police chief, are outstanding. We have an outstanding and a more experienced public works crew. We have a much more experienced city staff. And finally, we did transition to a professional fire department. That by itself I know is controversial, and not everybody agrees with that decision, but we did, and that was an increased cost of doing business. So we have increased costs of doing business as one of the primary drivers. Another one is the variable tax revenues that I mentioned. A lot of the city's taxes, such as the REIT taxes, real estate excise tax, so every time a house sells, 1% of the value of the real estate goes to the city, and as well as the B&O taxes. Those are very much revenue or economy driven. Utility taxes, sales and use taxes, all of those things fell off rather dramatically with the falling of the economy. The reason we chose the property tax is a property tax is a stable source of revenue and is not dependent on the level of economic activity. It's in the nature of how it's calculated. It is simple because it's just a rate increase. You're having to already write a check for property taxes. The city assessor doesn't have to do anything, and we don't have to hire additional staff in order to administer the tax. It's equitable because it's a broad-based tax. Everybody pays in proportion to their investment in the city, in property. And unlike a B&O tax, where those who vote, the residents, are placing a tax on those who don't vote, the businesses. We don't have a lot of retail activity in this city, and we're probably never going to have retail activity like Puyallup does, or Fife with those auto sales, or Tacoma. And we're going to have to be more dependent on a property tax if we're going to pay our bills. So that's the reason we came forward with a property tax. So as I said, the council has been fairly unanimous in its determination to fix this structural imbalance. And we view this problem, I would say, I understand not 100%, but I think the majority of the council does view this as the choices are: we either raise revenues, or we cut services. This property tax proposal is the revenue proposal, and if it fails, we will cut services. So, and I think that's the most important thing for you all to remember tonight from anything that I have to say.